I prepared a short presentation that we'll go through very shortly. And I said short. I'll try to actually blaze through it because it's a complex topic, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to actually talk about it, and want to hear your views about that. Just out of curiosity, is anyone here in the room working within a statistical agency? That would be really cool. Yay! I love you, by the way. That's great. That's lovely. I mean, I don't love you as a person. I love statistical agencies. I'm just very keen about your work. Okay, let's get started. So, sorting out industry classifications in Wikidata. This presentation will follow a bit my own personal experience as a recent Wikimedian who cares about statistics and who was trying to figure out how we could make Wikidata usable by statistical agencies. So why should we even care about industry classifications? I'm going to talk about the Canadian situation. So in Canada, industry codes are assigned by a division within Statistics Canada called the Business Register. And this Business Register lacks accurate information to accurately assign NAICS code. I mean, that report is old, but back in 2012, they were estimating that roughly 13% of businesses that were registered each year, or actually that of all businesses that had been registered, had an incorrect NAICS code. And I've always been puzzled by that and wondering, how can we fix this problem? What does NAICS mean? It means the North American Industry Classification System. That's the system that we use in Canada. It is considerably different from the ISIC, the International Standard Industry Classification, but it's a neat classification system nonetheless. So I thought, let's fix that. Let's start stating industries in Wikidata. So I thought I'd use the item for my own association. And okay, so the field that we're working in is the performing arts. I'm going to try that. Doesn't work. There's a warning there because performing arts is not an industry. Yeah, well, it's an activity, an economic activity, but not an industry. Okay, fine. Let's try something else then. Let's try to state the NAICS code because I'm familiar with NAICS codes. I know what my NAICS code, well, not mine, but that of the association is. So I'm going to state it directly. But then, problem. NAICS codes, it's the property for NAICS code is an external identifier, meaning that it can only be assigned to one item. That's a problem. I cannot therefore assign it to Gipacoa. Otherwise, I become myself an industry classification. So what do? I looked at other classifications and how they were implemented. So in the case of ISIC, I saw that some ISIC classifications were implemented, and they were each one, not all of them, but some industry classifications that have their own item, and in which, for example, in the case of creative arts and entertainment activities, this item itself is stated with property saying that its ISIC code is 9000. So that seems fairly robust, reasonable in terms of a way to model industry classifications, but it's radically different from what we have in NAICS. So what's the best? And this mode of implementing ISIC, it almost looks like an external ID approach, but it is not. So I try to sort things out. But before we go further, what's an industry anyway? So industry classifications, what they do is essentially they group organizations or businesses according to their primary activity. What's your product? What's your service? And based on that, they make a decision on the industry classification that applies to that particular business or organization. Now, it can be tricky because if an organization is very large, then it may need to have different NAICS code by different business divisions called establishments in the North American industry classification system. But that's what we're talking about. So I'm going to go through the next slides very quickly because there's a lot of content, but they're available. So that's a table that compares ISIC, NAICS, the European classification, and the North American industry classification system. What I'd like to highlight there is that in the case, if we look at the data types, so ISIC and NAICS are strings, whereas NAICS code is an external identifier. What this means is ISIC codes can be assigned to as many items as we want, but in the case of the external identifier, it should be assigned to only a single item. They're also quite different in their type constraint. So ISIC applies to industry, NAICS code applies to economic activity, and NAICS code no type constraint at all. So quite bizarre there. Intended use. So how should they be used? I won't read the whole thing, but as I was reading the property proposals, one thing caught my attention in the one for NAICS code. The person who proposed the code, the property said the code should apply to the item about the sector, and then the item about the sector used to describe item about business. Huh, that makes sense. You know, rather than assigning the NAICS code at the instance of organization level, apply it at the instance of the sector, which then describes the business. Makes a whole lot of sense. Actual losing, I'm going to skip that. So how should we implement industry classifications in Wikidata? We won't be able to answer this question in 25 minutes, but here's an example of how it can be modeled and how we are seeing it modeled in Wikidata. So to the right, we have an item for Eau de la Arts, which is an indigenous dance company. So it's an instance of Performing Arts Group, and Performing Arts Group as industry, creative arts, and entertainment, whatever that was, which happens to be ISIC 9000. So that's fairly robust. There's no, it's a long road, but there's no redundancy. So it would seem like a logical means of modeling industries. But going back to ISIC, then if that's the route that we're taking, shouldn't 9000 here be an external ID and be assigned only to this item and to no other item? I don't know. I'm asking the question. But then here comes NAICS code. Oh, NAICS code could be ascribed straight at the level of the Performing Arts Group and be an external ID and called 7111. Huh. What do we do with that? I don't know, honestly. So thanks for your attention. And is anyone actually still listening? It's a very complex topic. You can have access to these slides. I think I've already made them available. If not, I'll make sure they are available. So what are your thoughts? Okay, I see that there was some activity in the chat. Of course, I was not reading the chat as I was presenting. Yes, as Peter said, they are different systems, but the good thing is that there are some mappings that have been made, so they are not incompatible. Arthur says the issue of classification identifiers versus as classifiers classification identifiers versus classifiers has come up with books CP 8360 classification for works. And so what was the decision there? Did they consider it a classification identifier or a classifier? You need two distinct properties. Ha! Okay. So then it means that we need to just introduce a whole set of new properties for each classification. Lovely. Thesaurus says, I've dabbled in this field, and my conclusion was that going down this road meant that we would have to start reconciling all those different schemes. Yes, there will be no way around it. Well, some reconciling will need to happen. And yeah, some of those schemes, NAICS codes in particular, are quite fine-grained. So Peter asked, I think if there is an official source saying a particular NAICS or NAICS class applies, we should use that. Now, in the case of NAICS and NAICS and ISIC, like they have clear definitions of what economic activity falls within each classification. So there are sources there. So it wouldn't be hard to make this clear and explicit to users. Peter says, I would not want to use ISIC right away because I thought that one was derived from the government's classification. We should not privilege ISIC over the others, even though it is internationally comparable. I think one shouldn't preclude the other. Of course, if we are implementing industry classifications as classification identifiers, then would end up with classes of organizations being assigned multiple industry values based on the different classifications. So that starts to become quite complex, but still manageable. Yeah, Peter points out that an organization can have more than one classification, as I mentioned in my presentation. You're right. Arthur says, or ideally you can use P452 industry in a case like this. Okay, I think I'm getting slightly lost in the chat as to who's responding to whom now. Someone feels like turning their microphone on. There are only 25 of us, so that's entirely manageable. I see that most of you have joined with in listening mode only, so you can refresh and turn on your microphone. So Peter says the national classifiers actually classify establishments, places of business associated with a mailing address into industries, and businesses are bundles of establishments. Okay, I think you're providing me with a level of nuance that I had not understood about industry classifications. Thanks, Peter. Hello.
I didn't know putting my camera on would put me on screen.
That's quite fine. So, Arthur, what are your thoughts? What
So
are the best ways of solving
trying
this?
to explain myself a little bit. But like NAICS or the other identifiers, I mean, I think the first priority is to link them to the industry, concept within Wikidata, right? I mean, otherwise it's just a number that doesn't necessarily mean anything to anybody outside of people who know what it is, right? So, I mean, the fact that performing arts or whatever the relevant NAICS code, those are not linked together, you know, that's a problem in Wikidata that should be fixed. And performing arts probably
here's
should
a
be
question: Is performing arts an industry? Because, you know, when I saw the constraint warning, I thought, let's just go and edit the item for performing arts and call it an industry. But is it?
Well, I mean, if it's classified that way under this code, then that's a reference that suggests it is. Or maybe you need a new concept that is the performing arts industry or something like that. I don't know. Between one of those two would be the right solution, and then you link, and then, you know, ideally you would link all performing arts organizations with industry equals either performing arts or performing arts industry or whatever the concept is that has that NAICS code, and then you can link all the other codes also to that same thing, and then hopefully, assuming they're consistent with one another, which they probably are to some degree, that interlinking between identifiers is useful for a lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think that's the way we would try to deal with this kind of issue without creating a whole bunch of new properties.
Would you say that allowing an industry classification to be assigned to many different items would increase, you know, likelihood of completion? Because that's the problem with industry classifications. If we implement them as is, like with the actual classification name and using classification as an external identifier, and people don't know how to find their own industry classification by name, then they're not using it. So we have completion issues there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, so I just did a search for, I think it was 70. What is the NAICS code for performing arts?
It's 7111.
7111.
7111. That is the NAICS code for performing arts.
So I tried to search Wikidata to see if anything had that value, and I couldn't find anything. So, you know, it hasn't been assigned to anything in Wikidata right now, which is, so you can't use it either way. Anyway, that was
Paula.
That was kind of my perspective.
You are still muted though. You're in listening only mode. You'll have to refresh the page and turn on your camera. We will likely not get to achieve consensus on ways to model industry classifications. So let's say tomorrow I still have the courage to carry this conversation on. Is there a wiki project that would be suited for this conversation, or should we just have the discussion in the project chat?
I think you might want to do it under occupations and professions, although it's not exactly the same. It's not a very active project, but that would at least, we could maybe call this a subtask of that when we talk about industry classifications, because you want to talk about where people are employed. Now that I can speak, one of the things I wanted to mention is I did a quick look at the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, and it classifies performing arts as a discipline within the arts, which is different than an industry. And I would say possibly performing arts is a discipline in the arts, and the industry would be media and entertainment. So, but I would want to find a third-party source that said, you know, theatrical production is part of media and entertainment, which I think it would pretty much would be, or ballet. So I think we want to be really careful about just guessing at where we should put things and see if we can't find third-party sources that support that we can use as references, so that we aren't getting different people's ideas, because I've had lots of experience with getting different people's ideas about how things should be structured, and it can get really messy.
I hear you. Yeah, I would. My gut reaction when I saw that I was missing an NAICS code for the performing arts was not to call performing arts an industry, because actually in NAICS performing arts, I think the label for it is performing arts companies, not performing arts as is.
It could well be.
Peter, any further thoughts? Oh, you are still in listening mode only, I believe. You'll need to refresh and choose your mic. Oh, okay, how's that? And I see that Arthur has proposed the wiki project companies. It would make a lot of sense. Okay, Peter, we can't hear you now. You'll have to, I think you'll have to refresh the page and then choose microphone as an option so that you can, we can hear you. So, going back to my initial problem, trying to help Statistics Canada assign the right NAICS code, having industry, using industry property to then assign industry classifications would be a great mean, if we had a high level of completeness, but we may never get there. In the meantime, just stating that an organization has a field of work in the performing arts would allow a human being to infer that this person works in the performing arts sector, or that this organization works within the performing arts industry. What we may be missing, though, is business identifiers to help Statistics Canada know for sure that this entity in Wikidata is the same as the entity that the Canada Revenue Agency has identified. Okay, and Dick says is another wiki project organizations. Okay. I guess we'll have to look at both. How much time do we have left? We began this one at 3, did we? So we have just a few minutes left. I've already committed to one action item after WikidataCon. I don't know that I can take this one as an additional action item in the next month, especially because my organization has its annual conference coming up soon. So if someone wants to take over and try to organize that, that would be lovely, because otherwise it's gonna stay on my to-do list, and who knows how long it's gonna take before I get there. And I'm dropping my username so that if someone wants to take action on this and flag it for me that you are starting a conversation, I would be happily jumping in. Okay, so I see that Peter will chime in on the wiki project companies. Excellent. Actually, Peter says, I'm not skilled at getting properties defined. NAICS should be a property. Actually, all of them are a property. They are both an item describing the classification and a property to assign the right classification to an item. Paula says, agricultural properties, mostly activities. I guess that was in response to another question. Sorry, I'm having a hard time keeping up with the chat. Industry could be a property and ISIC qualifier. That would be a mess. Yeah, likely would. So, do I have time to even turn the, gosh, what we really need is a half day workshop where we break things down, consider multiple strategies, and then consider for each strategy, how effective would it be from the user's perspective? How effective would it be in terms of querying the data? and figuring out which strategy seems to work best on most accounts. So that would be, I think, something a discussion to have with statistical agencies themselves. This would be neat to have them help us help them. But I'm not sure anyone at the business registry at StatScan knows anything about Wikidata. So we might find ourselves in the kind of situation where a bunch of Wikimedians working with domain experts who know nothing about Wikidata and ontologies, which is not always the recipe for success. So anyways, our time is up. I was not expecting that would achieve consensus in 25 minutes. I just wanted to flag something that I thought needed attention, and maybe organizing a workshop would be a good thing. But I won't commit to doing this just because I commit to so many other things. Like this is my 3rd session in WikidataCon, and I've got another one later on today. So, but Peter, let's stay in touch. And you know, if you see a need for pushing this on your end with your colleagues in the US, and we can get some folks in Canada also involved, it would be really, really nice to get NAICS sorted out. As a final pointer, I've been working on a logic model for collecting all necessary information in the performing arts sector to be able to accurately assign a NAICS code to a performing arts organization. And we are in the process of implementing this modeling strategy in Canadian information systems. So please, let's stay in touch. I'll also drop my email address if you want to reach me at my work email address. The busy inbox, but I want to make sure that if someone takes on further work in this area, that you connect with me, because gosh, I would really, really like to be able to use Wikidata to help my my colleagues at StatScan. On this, gosh, 35 users. We reached 35 users talking about industry classifications. That's lovely. That just made my day. I never thought we'd have so many people for this kind of a session. So thank you all. I look forward to reconnecting with you at in subsequent sessions. We've got another couple of more hours and a full day of programming tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon and up to the evening.